Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're coming in from. My name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of CARSP. Today, we have a very special format. We have the CARSP Annual General Meeting, which will be followed by a webinar entitled Road Safety in Canada, Latest Trends. Now, before I get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, for both the AGM as well as the webinar presentations, could you please direct your questions to the Q&A feature at the bottom? For the AGM, we will be entertaining questions along the way. So we have a number of presenters and each one of them will entertain questions. So feel free to enter those questions into the Q&A as you think of them. As well, however, with the webinar after the AGM, those questions will be left to the end. I would now like to introduce our first presenter, and it is our president, Mr. Rahim Dilgir, who will outline the agenda of our AGM meeting. Thanks, Rahim.
Great. Thanks, Brenda. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you, or at least see your names. To be with you, this once a year when we can get together and share a little bit about the business of CARSP, to hear from you, and as well to enjoy this technical presentation after. So I want to say Tasal Wasiam, which is welcome in Coast Salish, the people of the lands where I reside in Vancouver, but I wanted to acknowledge that we're all joining from different lands, unceded and unceded territories across the country. So it's a important thing for us to all reflect on what that means for us. So a big welcome to our 540 CARSP members. We are up about 10% from last year, so we keep growing as an organization, and it's wonderful to have you all. If we just put up the agenda, I'll quickly take us through it. Great, thanks. So we're going to start with just a bit of an introduction to CARSP for those of you who are a little bit new or could use a reminder of sort of what's the latest, what the organization is all about. Then we'll get into some of the business. We will require you to weigh in on how your money is spent, and also we'll be sharing with you how your money has been spent in the past year. There's some other kind of questions we'll be asking for you to weigh in on about change to bylaws. That has to do with how we govern and operate the organization, which we would like your feedback on. We'll have an overview of what the organization has been up to over the past year. Some of the things that you have been involved in, or perhaps you didn't know about. So we'll highlight those. Then we'll have our Young Professionals Committee chairperson address everybody, and then talk a little bit about our publication, the Safety Newsletter. And as Brenda mentioned, although we will have take questions along the way as time permits, there may be a few minutes left at the end to get to whatever we weren't able to get to earlier. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so just a quick overview of what CARSP is all about, starting with our vision and mission, which is really what sort of I guess fundamentally speaks who we are and what we are about. So I'd like to read the vision starting with the second half. So I'm going to say our vision is to achieve 0 deaths and serious injuries on Canadian roads by following Vision Zero principles in our research and practical approaches. And our mission is stated as through the safe system approach to influence and support road safety professionals by providing access to multidisciplinary research, evidence-based practices, networking and collaboration opportunities to support the current United Nations road safety resolutions. So yeah, there's a couple of links there if you want to know more about Vision Zero, about the safe system approach, or about the UN road safety resolutions. Please feel free to find more information on our website, carsp.ca, or to Google those items to learn more about what our mission and vision is. Next, please. So a bit about our organization. we could just populate the rest of the slide. Yeah, I wanted to start with the bottom. It's exciting to announce that there's a new board. So you have recently elected in a number of board members, and I will read those names. Those are the ones with the asterisk beside them in the bottom box. Joanna Domerad, Laraz Friedman, Peter Kehoe, Aparna Krishan, Todd Snooks, and Umi Yogalingam. I hope I got the pronunciations right. So welcome, big welcome to those members. I hope, and I think many of them are on the call today. So and hopefully you will meet them and get to know them as they are representing you. So they will be among your kind of go-to people whenever you have questions or suggestions about the CARSP organization or about activities that can help you in doing whatever you do. There's also board members who are kind of re-elected to the board or whose terms are continuing, and those names are Amit Arora, Doug Biernes, Manan Gupta, Abrar Haq, Piero Hirsch, Brian Jonah, Vikas Ravada, Michael Turpin, Pascal Verville. Yeah, and I just wanted to say that we're really excited to have this whole board. I think it really reflects the diversity of our organization, both geographically and in terms of the various disciplines that are involved, since CARSP is a very multidisciplinary organization. I want to move to the top there. Pretty soon, we will have a new president and vice president, who the board, both the outgoing and incoming board of CARSP recently elected, and that is Valerie Smith. Vice president is Matthew Mulkern, who was already the acting vice president, and I will move on to being the past president. So this is the last, I guess, AGM that I'll be leading, and I'm really honored to have had the opportunity to serve you over the past couple of years, and I hope that I've represented you well. Just to complete the organization, we have a Safety News Network newsletter chief editor, and then of course our fearless executive director Brenda Suggett and executive assistant Navoda Rulagodaj, make sure the organization keeps functioning on a day-to-day basis. So thank you to the whole team, and we look forward to engaging with you, the membership, over the course of the next 2-year term. Thanks. And so I will now. Is there time for questions, Brenda? If there are any questions in the Q&A, I didn't see, or if anybody
There are not.
has any
No.
questions, please put them in. Otherwise, we'll take them later. Feel free to put them in at any time. Thanks.
Yep, there's no questions now, so we can go over to Paul, our treasurer.
Thank you, Raheem and Brenda. So we'll just quickly go through what happened last year. I will say that the review engagement document is posted on the website if you're looking for more information. So if we look for the statement of operations on our revenue side, the thing that stands out is we overprojected the revenue we would get from the conference quite substantially, it turns out. The conference, which was in Sudbury, had some difficulty with Air Canada, which hardly made us special. So that created some grief. We also had ERSTPP revenue, which came from Transport Canada supporting kind of a social media or a media promotion of road safety. Next slide. So along with revenue comes expenses. You can see that the CARSP conference, while we overestimated the revenue we would get, we also overestimated our expenses because a lot of people ended up joining virtually, and there's less money involved in doing that. We have executive services both for the conference and not for the conference. The insurance went up a little bit because we changed the insurance from board insurance to general liability insurance to cover the organization at our conference, if we attend other conferences and so on. The website was a little lower because They owed us a rebate from the year before. CAF project, so that goes to people who worked on it, the website, the Zoom license, and all of that. The review engagement is what we're looking at. And then some board funds. The AVSS is the Advanced Vehicle Safety Systems project, which is hopefully will be coming online sometime this year. We have Navoda. We paid roughly half of Navoda's salary for the time she's with us, and that extends to April 30th of this year. Next slide. So you have excess revenue over expenditures. We budgeted 11,000, we got 4,500. The investment income, we had budgeted 2,500 roughly, we got 400, mostly due to the fact that one of the certificates was cashed. Because I don't know if you recall, but we had financially some lean years in the last couple of years during the pandemic. And also the interest rates, while high now, were low then. So when you add it all together, we budgeted 14,000, we brought in 5,000. When you add it all together, we were looking to get 172,000. In our assets, net assets, we got 163. Mostly of that's due to the conference. Okay, next slide. Okay, so if you look at 2021 in the far right column and then 2022, you can see we have less cash. That's just a cash flow thing depending on what happens. Our GIC accounts are roughly the same. Accounts receivable is money that we have coming in but hasn't arrived yet. PayPal, so we use PayPal for collecting money, so we have some money in their bank, and we've paid some expenses towards the next conference. This was out of 2022. So bottom line is in 2023, we had $153,000. We're now up to $158,000, which roughly reflects the profit that you saw on the page before. Next slide. So to look forward to 2023, the membership revenue we anticipate will go up because the membership rates went up last year. So, or partway through the year. So that'll be reflected fully in this year. Again, now that interest rates are up, we're hoping to get investment income again from the GIC. We're looking towards $25,000 conference profit. That's our profit. We're teaming up with ITE, and so that's just our share. We have a few other things. ERSTPP still owes us almost $5,000, and the YPC gets topped up to $1,500 every year, so they're getting $250, and then we made some money on job posts. We expect to make money on job postings. So the total revenue for next year, we're looking at $61,000. Next slide. So the expenditures, just to go through them, you can see most of them are the same things you've seen before. There's nothing really outstanding, I don't think. The review engagement, again, is the thing that we're looking at. We have that done every year. So we're looking at our total expenses of $47,000, which I can't see the number on the bottom. But as I recall, it's about $13,000 to the good. Next slide. So the final comment from the accountants on the review engagement. A review engagement is not a full audit. It's just a review to see if things made sense and you can explain everything that's there. And so this is the statement they include. They sign it. The treasurer signs it on behalf of the board, and then that closes fiscal year 2022. So essentially, they found everything to be reasonable. Next slide. So we have two resolutions every year. The first one is that the 2022 financial statements and the 2023 budget be accepted as presented. And also that CARSP, being a non-soliciting, not-for-profit corporation, will conduct a review engagement again in 2023. These both resolutions require a vote by the members. That vote will take place online to be sent out on May the 18th. The deadline for voting would be May the 25th. Every other year it's been accepted, but if it isn't, we'll have to get back together and decide what to do. Next. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them now.
Yeah, I don't see any questions, Paul. So I think we can go on to the next speaker, which is Matthew Mulkern, our Vice President, and he's going to give an update on structure and governance and bylaws. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's annual general meeting of CARSP. As the Vice President of CARSP and the Chair of the Structure and Governance Committee, I'd like to go over a few things that our committee has worked on throughout this year. First of all, I would like to present to our members the changes to our bylaws. Now, these changes were sent in the email to you with the link to today's meeting and the description of the webinar that we're going to have later. So in that link, you can review the entire bylaws. You can also find a copy on our website as well. I just want to go over a few of the changes that were done. In general, there were no major changes to the bylaws. We just conducted a review to make sure that what was in the bylaws actually reflected the way that we're operating as an organization and as a board of directors, and as well removing some outdated language to some articles or some laws of the Canadian government that have been modified. So in general, we have an updated mission statement, which is in the preamble section of the bylaws. We have confirmed the young professional's role on the board of governors as a full voting member on the board. It's just in section 7 of the bylaws, so that text has been updated. The text in sections 19 and 20 have been updated to clarify the officer roles and their terms. Again, no major changes there, just kind of codifying how it is operating. Probably one of the biggest changes is to section 30. Now, for those of you who probably remember pre-pandemic days, we would usually have the AGM as part of the CARSP conference. And since the pandemic, we've moved the AGM online, which it is today. So even though we've gone back to in-person conferences, we'd like to continue having our AGMs online in order to give a wider audience for the AGMs and to allow more people to attend. But we have to modify the bylaws to kind of incorporate not only the way that the AGM is conducted, but to handle what we just talked about in Paul's section about how the financial statements are reviewed, that now they're able to be voted on an electronic vote instead of the old way of being voted on in person at our AGM of the conference. And then sort of the last major change out of all the minor changes was just removing and changing the references to the Canada Corporations Act, which has since been repealed by the Government of Canada. So just making sure that our language and our bylaws matches what the current Canadian regulations are. Okay, next slide, please. And I just want to take this opportunity to go over what else Structure and Governance has done. Of course, we reviewed the bylaws, but we also did the review and the implementation of the CARSP work plan. We have kind of redefined the roles of the president and vice president just to be sure that there's more equal work share between the two roles. And of course, as Rahim mentioned, kind of codifying the role and responsibility of the past president. So myself as vice president, along with Valerie Smith, our incoming president, and Rahim, look forward to working as an executive leading the organization over the next 2 years. We also work together with the executive committee, which has been reviewed through Structure and Governance to determine its effectiveness in helping run the organization. And we also helped run and conducted a board election that had the highest number of candidates since 2018. So as you saw on that first slide there, we have a full board going in next year, all 20 positions full, which is great. That's going to be really helpful to the organization, and really looking forward to working with everyone. And part of that, we're going to have an updated board manual just to make sure that the board members are up to date in terms of procedure. So just two things I want to mention before I finish my section here is that for the bylaw review, that will also be part of a SurveyMonkey that will go out to you, and we need you to vote for those changes for approval. Again, the full bylaw text can be found on the website or as part of the email for this meeting. And finally, I want to mention, and I know it's going to be mentioned later, that I know we had a lot of unsuccessful candidates for the board, and I know there's been a lot of interest in the board, but I wanted to just mention that any CARSP member is welcome to be part of a CARSP board subcommittee. So if you're interested in being part of one, please send us a message, and we'd love to have you part of the team. And I will take any questions now if there are any. Brenda?
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any questions at the moment, Matthew. So
okay, then I will pass it over to you then for the next section of the AGM.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I have the pleasure of being able to give an update on our activities. Next slide, please. So a key thing that we've been working on the last couple of years, 3 years, is the Knowledge Exchange and Training Hub project, which was funded by Transport Canada. We started many activities in 2021 and continued those through into 2022. For instance, in 2022, we did member interviews, which augmented the information we had gathered from member surveys the year prior. We also completed and launched our new website. We completed and launched the new version of the Safety Network newsletter. We continue to offer our monthly webinars, and there's some examples of them right there, and continued work on our advanced vehicle safety systems section of our website, which will be launched throughout later this year. Next slide, please. Sorry, just okay. And some other activities that we've been doing is the CARSP conference, which took place in June of last year. This was a hybrid conference. The theme was the UN Decade of Action for Road Safety. We had 221 participants, roughly half were in person, half virtual. The majority of people in a feedback survey that we conducted said they were either satisfied or very satisfied with the conference. And they also were very satisfied with the keynote speakers and the panels in terms of the timeliness of their topics, the knowledge level of the speakers as well. Immediately following that conference, we had a Vision Zero Symposium, which we offered in combination with the, in partnership with the Ontario Traffic Council. This took place also in Sudbury, and it was also a hybrid event. We had around 90 people participate. 1/3 were there in person, 2/3 were online. Again, a feedback survey that was conducted showed that people were quite satisfied with the importance of the topics presented and the quality of the presentations themselves. We also had, sorry about that, I just realized that image is kind of blocking things there. I apologize for that. We also had a fall engagement event, during which we launched our new website, and that took place in November. This was also an opportunity where we asked our members for feedback in terms of making improvements, and we did get some great feedback, which we did put into action. We had over 50 people attend that event. In terms of partner engagement, 2 examples. Firstly, with Parachute, we continued to partner with them around webinars related to the UN Decade of Action. If you'll recall, back in November of 21, we did a webinar on what you need to know in terms of the UN Decade of Action and the global plan. In April of 2022, we took that a step further and we talked about taking action. And what that meant was we talked about the role that NGOs, local government, and stakeholders can play to encourage their government leaders to make specific, meaningful commitments to reduce road traffic deaths and injuries. And both those webinars are available on our webinar areas, so feel free to check those out. We have also partnered with the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police around a traffic enforcement project. With this project, we also have two academic partners, Western University and the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. With this project, we have already conducted interviews with police leaders, and we are yet to still conduct a survey of frontline police officers who are involved in traffic enforcement. The goal of this overall project is to provide police community with recommendations around enhancing strategies related to traffic enforcement. We're going to be looking at things like their current practices with traffic enforcement, as well as some of the barriers that they currently experience. And we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, and coming up in, I think about 3 weeks now, it's coming fast, is our 2023 conference. And as Paul already alluded, we are partnered with the Ontario, or I should say, the Institute for Traffic and Transportation Engineers Canada, ITE Canada, and that is being held in Winnipeg from June 4th to the 7th. And just a little note that fees will go up after this Friday, the registration fees, so please do go get those soon. The theme of the conference is Road Safety, Creating Impact Through Diversity. We have over 400 people registered, and there's over 150 technical presentations, multiple panels, there's tours, a traffic bowl, competition, lots of stuff, a student leadership summit, many student events as well. So, and we have a lot of students coming, which is really exciting. We have about 65 students out of those 430, I think, that we have now. Immediately following the conference on the Wednesday afternoon is a CARSP workshop. It's entitled From Rhetoric to Reality, Promising Practices for Advancing Transportation Equity in Canadian Cities. Urban planners and academics from two different associations that we partner with, Interact and Level Up Planning, are going to be joined by city representatives. And these representatives are the ones that they've done this project on. And basically, they scouted out who is making progress at applying equity policies on the ground to make sure, or I should say to ensure, that new transportation infrastructure benefits those most in need. So we're learning from those who put it into practice, as well as some lessons learned of things to avoid. So it's a very interactive, it's panel presentations, but there's also small group work, and it's meant to be very interactive and practical as well. So there's still space for that. $50, that's waived if you need that. And that you can read about that in the other events area of the CARSP website. Next slide, please. And I think that Matthew already alluded to this, but just to once again put a plug in, we do welcome people to join our various committees. And just as a little refresher, the different ones are structure and governance, finance, marketing and membership, and of course our young professionals committee. If you have any questions or just want to learn more about those, I can supply you with more information. Please reach out to me at info@carsp.ca. And I'm just going to check and see. I don't see any questions. So I think we can move on to the next presenter. And it is Robert Colonna, our YPC chair. So take it away, Robert.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm excited to see everyone in a couple of weeks. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Young Professionals Committee is a subcommittee of CARSP comprised of students and young professionals working together in road safety. You can go to the next slide. There we go. So we really believe that Canadian youth can work together to create safer roads and transportation networks for all road users. The Young Professionals Committee has 3 main goals, and these really stem from our vision and mission statement. They include generating awareness and advocacy for the road safety profession, continuing to grow our national network of students and young professionals in the field, and promoting the Global Youth Statement for Road Safety. Now, you'll see on the next slide that the Young Professionals Committee really prides itself in being active throughout the year. We host a number of different events. You can go to the next slide. There we go. These include the annual student paper and poster competitions, we started offering a student travel award to help students and young professionals attend the conference. And we also host various social and professional development events, both at and outside of the conference. Now, we're always looking for new members. So this year, we're launching our regional coordinator position. And we also have a few YPC executive positions opening after the conference. So if you're interested, please reach out. Our email is linked below. You can also visit the website to find links to our social media accounts, including our Twitter account and our LinkedIn group, just to kind of stay up with all the updates. Next slide. Now, as CARSP members, you also receive the Safety Network newsletter. And many of you know that we recently updated the SNN based on the feedback that we received from the member survey. We updated it to an email format compared to the traditional PDF. So we really hope that you find it more enjoyable and find it more productive to read. Now, we're still thinking of ways to improve it. So for 2023, we're going to accept a wider range of submissions and also restructure a little bit of the content to serve you better. So we're going to be offering SNN exclusives, and these are going to include articles that are on any topic that are exclusive to the Safety Network newsletter. We'll include road safety spotlights, and these will provide short updates on various projects and initiatives that are led by CARSP members. We'll offer CARSP highlights, and these will include highlights from CARSP. So new resources, new information, new volunteer or job opportunities, or different activities that you can get involved with. Member features will spotlight various CARSP members to help increase exposure and allow you to gain a better understanding on who's actually part of this organization and some of the work that they're up to. Upcoming events will provide updates on various upcoming webinars, events, and conferences. And lastly, in the news, we'll provide links to different news stories that may be of interest of CARSP members. So stay tuned for the next issue as we start incorporating some of these different sections. And if you have any feedback, you can give us an email. We're always looking for new authors, new editors, and new content, and also just general feedback on the structure of the newsletter. If there's anything that you find helpful or you think could be improved, let us know. We're always open to it. Next slide. Okay, now it's question time.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. That was a great overview. And actually, we do have a question. Yay. Okay, the question is, how can we apply for volunteer jobs? What are the requirements? And that's a great question. Basically, the first thing you would do is just email myself and at info@carsp.ca. I can then direct it to the necessary person. So if you're interested in joining the YPC, for instance, I would then direct it over to Robert. And basically, it's up to the chair of each of the committees in terms of what they're looking for. But to be honest, I mean, we welcome all sorts of support. We're not picky. I mean, it is great if you have a background that aligns with a particular committee, for instance, finance, if you've got some accounting background, or structured governance, if you've had some previous experience on a board, but it's not required. And sometimes it's just a matter of having people there that are willing to do the work and learn. So, but it's a great opportunity. It's also good insight in whether you want to be a board director as well. So it's a good first step. Is there any other board, or I should say person that's on, one of our speakers who'd like to further add to that? No? Okay. We do. Oh, sorry, Raheem, did you have something?
Well, I just wanted to say that it's a great opportunity, right? Any volunteering opportunity is something that builds skills that you may otherwise not have been able to build. As well, you're making a positive contribution to your, not only the road safety community, but I would say the Canadian community, because you, by being more involved, you're also contributing to the vision that CARSP set and has supported for other organizations, which is really aiming for a 0 fatalities and serious injuries in this country. So if you do want to contribute that in a meaningful way, then I'm sure we can find a way for you to do that. Just reach out to Brenda. I strongly encourage you to do so. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Raheem. Well put. I have a second question now, and I'm going to direct this one to Robert, and I'll just read it. What is the age range for the young professionals?
Okay, thanks, Brenda. I love this question. I always get this question. So in the past, we used to have an age range up to 30, but after some careful consideration, we decided to remove that and not put an age limit on it. And this is because there's a lot of students and young professionals that might be older than that age range. Some people might have worked in another field for a while and then are now transferring to the road safety community. They might also be graduate students doing their master's or doctoral studies or postdoc. So short answer, there's no age limit to it. If you want to get involved, you can just send me an email and we'll hopefully be able to find something for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Robert. And why don't you put your email into the chat in case people didn't write it down when we had that slide on? That would be great. All right, perfect. Well, we're a little ahead of schedule, which is great. So it is now time for the main event of our webinar. It is a presentation. Once again, it's on road safety in Canada, latest trends. And we have two speakers from Transport Canada, and I'm going to introduce both of them. Gail Italiano is a senior policy analyst for road safety at Transport Canada. She has been involved with the Vulnerable Road Users Task Force as part of the Secretariat since 2017. She is also involved with the School Bus Safety Task Force, which is currently conducting 3 pilots researching seatbelts on school buses and a variety of safety technologies to improve school bus safety. She is a member of CARSP, great, and the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators, and participates on the PIARC World Roads Association Road Safety Working Group. So welcome, Gail. As well, there's Jean-Francois Lucier. He is a senior research analyst for road safety at Transport Canada with over 15 years of experience. His work includes conducting data analysis using the National Collision Database and other data sources to support the work of Transport Canada on various road safety topics. In the past, he has provided analytical support on projects such as CCMTA district driving surveys. He is also a member of CARSP, which is great. Thank you. And I believe that Gail is going to take it away. So I will pass the torch over to you two.
Thank you, Brenda. The Road Safety in Canada 2020 report was developed to examine Canada's progress during the United Nations first decade of action for road safety, which ended in 2020. It also measures Canada's progress at the midterm of the Road Safety Strategy 2025, which has a vision of 0 fatalities and serious injuries due to motor vehicle collisions. So we'll provide an overview of the report to show the progress. So here in this slide, it shows the key elements of today's webinar. JF is going to speak to the data that confirms the progress made during this period, while I'm going to speak about the measures that have helped with Canada's progress. Road safety in Canada, as most of you know, is a shared responsibility among all levels of government, industry partners, and all road users, as this slide shows. Transport Canada is responsible for standards and regulations on new and imported vehicles, child restraints, and tires. And this next slide shows other stakeholders, other partners. The provinces and territories are responsible for driver licensing, vehicle registration, and rules of the road. And over to you.
Data is a key element of this report. So collision data is the primary source used there to illustrate Canada's progress from 2011 to 2020. This data is gathered by the provinces and territories and submitted to Transport Canada, which maintains the National Collision Database and is responsible for national data reporting. Some data from coroners, medical examiners, and observational surveys were also used in the report to provide a clearer, more accurate picture for some key road safety topics.
The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution in March of 2010 to establish the first decade of action 2011 to 2020. The principles guiding the decade of action are listed here, and they were what provided the framework for the Road Safety in Canada 2020 report. Launched in 2016, the Road Safety Strategy 2025 is the fourth national initiative to improve road safety in Canada. And it's important to note that the first three national strategies helped reduce fatalities and serious injuries by 44 and 56% respectively between 1996 and 2015.
In the next session, I'll be speaking about the overall level of road safety. As the title of the report indicates, the data here covers up to 2020. So let's first look at some key numbers for 2020. As motor vehicles are a fundamental means of commuting to work and traveling our vast geography, Canada has around 1.13 million two-lane equivalent kilometers of roadways. Canada's population in 2020 was over 38 million, with close to 26 million registered vehicles. And collision involving those vehicles resulted in 2020 in 104,286 injured victims and 1,746 fatalities. So to put these last two numbers in perspective, it amounts to roughly 285 injured victims and 5 fatalities being reported on Canadian roads every day. This graph shows that despite substantial increases in population, licensed drivers, and registered vehicle, though since 1975, there were 71% fewer fatalities, 53% fewer injuries, and 69% fewer serious injuries in 2020 than in 1975. Serious injuries here are defined as those that require overnight treatment in the hospital. So the risk of fatalities can be examined by looking at the number of fatalities in the context of exposure. This graph shows that fatalities per billion vehicle kilometers traveled, or VKTs, were lower in 2020 than in 2011 in 10 jurisdictions. The decrease was greater than the national average of 22% for 8 of the jurisdictions. Note here that Nunavut is not included in the graph because of large variation in the rates, but the data can be found in the report. Similarly, for serious injuries, the rates decreased for all but 2 jurisdictions between 2011 and 2020. And that resulted in a 35% decrease at the national level. And the percentage decreases were greater than the national average for four of the jurisdictions. Now, if we're delving in the characteristics of collisions, almost half of fatal collisions involve passenger cars, with around a quarter involving light trucks and vans, and around 12% involving tractor trailers or straight truck. For injury collisions, in 2020, around 2/3 involve passenger cars, and a little bit under 4% involve tractor trailers or straight trucks. In terms of some other characteristics, single vehicle collisions made up roughly half of fatal collision and 1/3 of injury collisions between 2011 and 2020. And around 2/3 of fatal collision occurred on rural roads, while almost 3/4 of injury collision happened on urban roads. It's also worth noting that fatal collisions peaked during the weekend, with Saturday having the most fatal collisions, followed by Friday and Sunday. Tuesday was the day with the fewest fatal collision. In the report, you can also find details on the IRIS risk time periods by time of the day and day of the week. With respect to the months where collision happened, fatal collisions peaked in July and August, while injury collisions were more evenly distributed, but they peaked in July, August, October, and November. Now moving on to the characteristics of crash victim. This graph shows that 2/3 of fatalities in 2020 were motor vehicle occupants. Vulnerable road users made up about 30% of the fatalities, with pedestrians representing the largest group. Male victims made up about 3/4 of road user fatalities and of the fatally injured drivers, despite representing roughly half of licensed drivers in Canada. A similar distribution can be seen for serious injury, although here the percentage for represented by pedestrians and motorcyclists was the same. Males represented 63% of serious injuries and 65% of seriously injured drivers. Looking at fatalities by age group, this graph shows that there were fewer fatalities in 2020 than in 2011 for all age groups, except for adults aged 55 to 64, who saw an increase of 13% in fatalities. So the number of fatalities was the highest for adults 65 and older, which may reflect the increasing size of that age group or their frailty. On the other hand, serious injuries declined for all age groups, with decreases for children aged 0-4 and adults aged 25 to 44 and 55 to 64 being less than the national average. Now, if we look at the rates per 100,000 population, this graph shows that between 2011 and 2020, the fatality rates decreased for all age groups. The same is true if you look at males and females separately, except for females aged 0-4. Similarly, for serious injuries, the rates also declined for all age group, and that includes when looking at males and females separately for all age group too. Here we're looking at the social cost of collisions, which is a measure of the social and economic costs of collisions in Canada. It consists of two major elements, which are the human costs and other costs. Human costs are the costs of fatalities, disabilities, and non-disabling injuries, while the other costs include elements such as traffic delays and other elements that you can see described on the right side of this graph. In 2020, it was estimated at approximately $36 billion, a 19% decrease since 2011, or around 99 million each day in 2010 dollars. And we should note that 82% of the costs are human costs due to fatalities and injuries, while vehicle property damage represents about 11%. Now, keeping in mind that part of the vision of RSS 2025 is to have the safest roads in the world, we can see here that Canada was ranked 12th based on fatalities per billion VKTs in 2018 compared to other OECD member countries. So for this next section, we'll be examining trends for key contributing factors and high-risk group identified in RSS 2025, as well as some of the measures that have been used to improve safety. The data that will be presented relates mostly to fatalities, but trends for serious injuries are generally similar. So let's begin with alcohol impaired driving. The NCDB data shows that alcohol is still identified as a contributing factor in many fatal collisions. As shown in this graph, 18% of the fatalities involve a driver under the influence of alcohol as a contributing factor in 2020, compared to 26% in 2011. During the same period, alcohol was a contributing factor more often for drivers aged 20 to 44, but its prevalence decreased for all age groups except those that were aged 65 and older. The report also uses additional data sources to give a clearer picture, including coroner's data and roadside surveys. For example, according to the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, coroners determined that 32% of drivers killed in 2016 had been drinking. 79% of those drinking drivers had blood alcohol concentrations, or BAC, over the criminal code limits of 0.08. About the percentage of fatalities involving a drinking driver, coroner's data showed a decrease from 34% in 2008 to 28% in 2016. It's also worth noting that 33% of fatally injured pedestrians had been drinking, and most had a BAC over 0.08. For those that are interested, the report has more details from coroner's data. Nighttime roadside surveys conducted by 5 jurisdictions in 2017 and 2018 are another data source. A report combining the results prepared for the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators, or CCMTA, showed that 4.4% of breath-tested drivers were positive for alcohol. 2.9% had BACs under 0.05, 0.8% were between 0.05 and 0.08, and 0.7% were over 0.08. Again, this report provides more details on the roadside survey data for those that are interested.
Canada has a tiered system to deal with alcohol impaired driving that includes requirements for young and novice drivers, administrative penalties for lower BACs, and the Criminal Code of Canada. The Criminal Code has a threshold set at 0.08, while administrative penalties have a more stringent threshold between 0.04 in Saskatchewan and 0.05 in other provinces and territories for alcohol, including zero tolerance for novice and young drivers under the age of 21. And most jurisdictions have administrative license suspensions for drivers with a BAC above 0.05 or above 0.04 in Saskatchewan, with suspensions ranging from 3 to 5 days for the first offense and 30 days to 4 months for subsequent offenses. With respect to enforcement, police conduct regular sobriety checkpoints, and if convicted, drivers may be required to install alcohol ignition interlocks for up to a year in order to get their license reinstated. In terms of education and awareness campaigns, governments and organizations such as Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MAD, have been active in helping to make drinking and driving socially unacceptable.
Moving on to drug impaired driving, collision data shows that 5.1% of fatalities involved a driver under the influence of drugs as a contributing factor in 2011. Between 2011 and 2020, this percentage peaked at 7.9% in 2016, but decreased to 3.5% by 2020. The percentage of fatally injured drivers with drugs as a contributing factor was usually highest for drivers aged 20 to 34 and lowest for those aged 65 and older. In 2016, coroners detected one or more psychodynamic drugs in 47% of the fatally injured drivers tested, up from 41% in 2008. The prevalence of cannabis increased from 18% to 21% between 2008 and 2016. Again, like previously, if you're interested, the report goes into more details about the coroner's data. And among drivers positive for drugs in 2016, 46% had used cannabis and 41% had taken central nervous system depressants. Also, there were 20% that were positive for both alcohol and drugs. Roadside surveys showed that 10.2% of the sampled drivers who gave an oral fluid sample tested positive for at least one potentially impairing substance other than alcohol. Of those, around 7.6% tested positive for cannabis, representing 75% of the drivers who had drug present. And again, you can find more about the roadside survey data in the report.
Over the past decade, drinking and driving has decreased, but as the data shows, drug use, especially cannabis, has increased considerably. Changes in 2018 to the Criminal Code of Canada added new offenses that are shown here that address driving while drug impaired. A variety of tools are available to the police, for example, demanding an oral fluid screen roadside test to look for the presence of cannabis or cocaine. A standard field sobriety test can determine if the driver is impaired by alcohol or drugs. And once a driver is arrested, a drug recognition evaluator can administer various physical, behavioral, or blood tests to look for the presence of drugs and its concentration. Most Canadian jurisdictions have administrative laws that suspend the license of drivers who test positive for drugs from 1 to 30 days, depending on the jurisdiction. Awareness campaigns focused on drugs and driving have been conducted successfully, such as Ontario's Barely High is Still Too High to Drive, which is focused on cannabis. And the Department of Public Safety also ran another campaign entitled Don't Drive High in 2018.
Distracted driving is another important contributing factor. In 2011, police found that 21% of fatalities occurred in collisions involving a distracted or inattentive driver. That percentage reached 23% in 2015 and was back to around 21% in 2020. Estimate based on data from 4 jurisdictions that are tracking different types of distraction show that roughly 2% of fatal and injury collisions involve mobile device use as a contributing factor. The data also show that drivers 65 and older had the highest percentage of fatally injured drivers for which distraction or inattention was a contributing factor. And over the 10-year period between 2011 and 2020, distraction or inattention increased for drivers aged 20 to 34 and those 65 and older. Distraction from mobile device use is a persistent issue. TC and the CCMTA have conducted surveys about this issue every few years since 2006, 2007. In the 2016 to 2017 surveys, around 7.2% of drivers were observed using mobile devices, and that includes talking, texting, or holding the device. Around 7.9% of drivers in urban areas and 3% of those in rural areas were seen using mobile devices. And drivers under 25 were more likely to be using mobile devices than older drivers. Mobile device use for talking decreased from 5.5% in 2006-2007 to 2.3% in 2012-2013, before increasing again to 2.9% in 2016-17. Mobile device use for texting increased from 1.6% to 2.2% between 2012-2013 and 2016-2017.
The decrease in mobile device usage between 2006 to 2007 and 2012 to 2013 may reflect new provincial and territorial legislation that bans the use of mobile devices when driving. In contrast, in the increase in both talking and texting in 2016 to 2017 may reflect the growing popularity of these devices. There may also be the belief that the police will have difficulty detecting mobile device use, but police have developed creative ways to detect use, and some of the examples are listed on this slide. Enforcement is stiff with fines and demerit points for drivers caught using these devices. For example, here in Ontario, a driver's first conviction can result in a fine between $615 to $1,000, 3 demerit points, and a 3-day license suspension, with new drivers receiving a 30-day suspension. As indicated here, a list of penalties can be found on the CAA website if you're interested. There are quite a few public education campaigns that play a significant role addressing the risks of using mobile devices while driving. For example, Saskatchewan's Distracted Driving Kills and the CCMTA's Leave the Phone Alone are ones that may be familiar to you.
Aggressive driving, another area of concern, include behaviors such as speeding, running red lights, tailgating, weaving in and out of traffic, and failing to yield the right of way. And CDB defines speeding-related collisions as those collisions where driving too fast for conditions was a contributing factor. This graph doesn't show a clear trend for the percentage of fatalities in speeding-related collisions between 2011 and 2020. It was 26% in 2011 and 25% in 2020. So that suggests that the prevalence of speeding hasn't noticeably changed during that decade. Fatally injured drivers aged 34 and under were the most likely to be involved in speeding-related collision. And this percentage decreased mostly with age, and drivers aged 65 and older were the least likely to be involved. Alcohol was another contributing factor for 28% of the speeding drivers involved in fatal collision, while distraction or inattention was a contributing factor for 13% of those drivers. Other aggressive driving behaviors also pose a risk. For example, 27% of fatalities happened at intersections, 39% of which did not have a traffic control device. Drivers not yielding the right of way represented about 10% of fatalities, with distraction and inattention being a contributing factor for 43% of the drivers and those failing to yield the right of way collisions. Disobeying a traffic control device or a traffic officer is another aggressive behavior which contributed to about 7% of the fatalities.
There are a variety of measures to address aggressive driving. Some jurisdictions allow for the use of speed cameras to control speed in high-risk areas such as roadway, work sites, and in school zones. Some municipalities, such as here in Ottawa, where we are, have reduced speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour or even as low as 30 kilometers per hour in residential areas and school zones. These cameras have on average reduced fatalities and serious injuries by about 36%. Most jurisdictions have passed stunt driving laws that result in large fines and license suspensions. Another tool is the red light cameras to deter drivers from running through red lights. These cameras are often rotated to different intersections, leaving drivers unsure as to whether a camera is installed or not. Finally, in the area of public awareness, Manitoba's Traffic Culture campaign invites people to consider their actions and attitudes towards other road users in relation to normal social etiquette. It also highlights road rage as a high risk and unsafe behavior. And this campaign uses the brand Friendly Manitoba, which reflects the long-standing slogan on Manitoba license plates.
Because of their age and inexperience, young and new drivers are more likely to be involved in fatal and injury collision. From 2011 to 2020, drivers aged 24 or under had higher fatal collision involvement rates than any other age groups. Overall, the involvement declined with age. The fatal collision involvement rate declined for all age groups, but in particular for drivers aged 15 to 19 and 20 to 24, the decreases were 34% and 20%. This graph shows that 40% of the fatalities involving young drivers were the young drivers themselves, and 21% were their passengers. Young drivers represented the highest percentage of fatalities for each of the 10 years between 2011 and 2020.
So there are several factors that have likely helped to reduce collisions involving young novice drivers. Graduated driver licensing programs, which now exist in all Canadian jurisdictions, slowly introduce these drivers to driving by keeping them out of high-risk situations. Young and novice drivers are subject to several rules, such as restricted from driving late at night, using drugs or alcohol, driving with young passengers, driving on highways, and only driving with an experienced driver. Following this initial phase, there's another 12 months intermediate or practice phase, which has fewer restrictions before they become fully licensed.
Vulnerable road users are more at risk because they aren't protected by a vehicle structure. They include pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. Pedestrian fatalities decreased 11% and serious injuries decreased 26% between 2011 and 2020. Also, as you can see in this graph, there was no clear trend for fatalities. It's worth noting that about 1/3 of pedestrian fatalities happened at urban intersections. Pedestrian fatalities per 100,000 population decreased or remained the same for most age groups, except for those aged 10 to 14 and adults aged 25 to 44. The pedestrians age 65 and older at the highest rate in both 2011 and 2020. But it should be noted that it decreased 40% during that period. They made up 32% of pedestrian fatalities in 2020, which represents almost double the share of the population that they represent. For motorcyclists, they represented 11% of fatalities and 14% of serious injuries in 2020, despite only 3% of registered vehicles being motorcycles in 2020. This graph shows that motorcyclist fatalities had variations from year to year, but were 40% higher in 2020 than in 2011. And serious injuries increased 19% from 2011 to 2016 before decreasing 23% from 2016 to 2020. And between 2011 and 2020, motorcyclist fatalities increased for all age groups, starting from the 25 to 34 age group and older. And in particular, fatalities of of motorcyclists 65 and older more than tripled over that period. In 2020, 2% of the fatalities were cyclists, and cyclist fatalities decreased 9% during that period. Serious injuries, on the other hand, increased 16% between 2011 and 2015, and then decreased 28% between 2015 and 2020. 68% of the fatally injured cyclists were 45 and older, and cyclists aged 45-54 at the highest fatality rate per 100,000 population, followed by those aged 55 to 64. And fatality rates decreased for most of the age group for cyclists, except those aged 04, 25, 34, and 45 to 64 between 2011 and 2020.
In 2018, the Council of Ministers responsible for transportation and highway safety issued a report entitled Safety Measures for Cyclists and Pedestrians Around Heavy Vehicles. And that identified methods that could improve safety for vulnerable road users around heavy commercial vehicles, particularly, but traffic in general. Such measures included technology such as speed and red light cameras, while road infrastructure improvements included such things as segregated bike lanes and bicycle boxes, just to name a few. Various jurisdictions have run public awareness campaigns addressing issues specific to vulnerable road users. Quebec, for example, launched a campaign on pedestrian safety in 2019, focusing on raising awareness among both drivers and pedestrians, regarding the importance of making eye contact at crosswalks and while crossing at crosswalks and respecting the pedestrians right of way. There are also campaigns to encourage drivers to anticipate motorcyclists for both drivers and motorcyclists to adopt good driving behaviors. Also, Transport Canada has partnered with Parachute Canada to create a repository on their website of new and emerging countermeasures to protect and support pedestrians and cyclists.
The involvement of heavy commercial vehicles in collision is an ongoing safety concern, as collisions involving vehicles of this size are more likely to produce more serious consequences on average than for other vehicle types. Commercial vehicles represented around 9% of all vehicles involved in collision, but were involved in roughly 18% of the fatalities. From 2011 to 2020, fatalities in commercial vehicle collisions decreased 26%. In 2020, 85% of fatalities were either occupants of other vehicles or vulnerable road users, and only 15% were occupants of commercial vehicles. And these percentages were relatively stable between 2011 and 2020.
In terms of improving commercial vehicle safety, a variety of measures are in place and under development. The National Safety Code for Motor Carriers consists of 16 standards intended to maintain the safety of motor carriers, addressing such issues as licensing requirements, load securement, and periodic motor vehicle inspections. The commercial vehicle drivers' hours of service regulations sets out work and drive limits and rest requirements to reduce fatigue-related crashes, injuries, and fatalities. In addition to this, Transport Canada mandated the use of electronic logging devices by federally regulated bus and truck motor carriers and their drivers, which came into force in 2021. And these devices automatically track driving time, replacing the manual approach with pen and paper. Entry-level driver training has been added to the National Safety Code standards to ensure commercial vehicles have the knowledge and skills to safely operate these vehicles in Canada and in the US. Between 2011 and 2020, around 5% of the fatalities and 4% of serious injuries involved a vehicle issue, such as faulty brakes or tires as a contributing factor. Transport Canada has put into law a number of improvements to vehicle safety regulations, including electronic stability control, rear visibility systems, occupant protection, and frontal collisions, just to name a few. According to the NCDB, driver behavior is a contributing factor in 87% of fatal collisions. As such, connected and automated vehicles hold great potential to make Canada's roads safer. However, there are emerging road safety issues related to their introduction, such as safety validation, cybersecurity, and privacy. In particular, these vehicles and the infrastructure that supports them are vulnerable to cyber threats. So Transport Canada continues to work with a broad range of stakeholders to support cybersecurity research, testing, and the development of vehicle cybersecurity guidance and tools. Advanced driver assistance systems such as automatic emergency braking and intelligent speed adaptation are currently available on some vehicles and can help reduce fatalities and injuries. It is very important that drivers of these vehicles that have this type of technology installed understand how they work so that they're able to understand the behavior of their car. Otherwise, it can become a distraction. The introduction of new vehicle types such as low-speed electric scooters and unicycles, etc., may result in changes to existing rules and regulations. And older drivers, it's potentially a challenge making it because they make up an increasing share of the licensed drivers on Canadian roads, currently accounting for about 20% of all drivers compared to 12% just 20 years ago. As the population ages and vehicle technology becomes more complex, coupled with potential physical and cognitive issues, this all could affect the safety of their driving. In terms of drug-impaired driving at this point, there are no roadside or laboratory interlock devices that can be used to measure the amount of drugs a driver has consumed. Further, no dose-response relationship for cannabis or other drugs exist. This makes it difficult to define an unsafe level for drivers, unlike alcohol. Finally, the amount of time it takes for cannabis to affect the user depends on how the cannabis is used. So in closing, the report is now available on the TC website at the link provided in this slide. Also created to complement the report is the Road Safety in Canada Improving Your Safety brochure, which is designed for all road users in order to keep themselves, their families, and their communities safe. It will be available shortly. I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and we will be happy to answer your questions about this presentation.
Okay, thank you so much to Gail and Jean-Francois. Excellent overview, a lot of information, a lot of great, very comprehensive in terms of all the different areas that you covered and a lot of different sources. So that was a great overview. And we do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is with respect to the year 2020. This person says your report relies heavily on the year 2020 as a benchmark for road safety in Canada. Many studies have shown that COVID had a substantial impact on road safety. We just wondered what you thought about maybe instead using 2019 as the comparison, and just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, we did use 2011 to 2020 for most of the data, so that it corresponds to the years of the decade of action. So for sure, we know that 2020 had an impact on road safety. And we were able to see it in some of the data that were presented, where we saw a large decrease from 2019 to 2020.
Okay, Gail, did you want to add, or is that good?
No, that's good. I think JF covered that well.
Okay, perfect. And there was another question about the availability of data for the data that you've covered in this presentation, and whether it is available publicly, and particularly to researchers who, like you, want to, delve deeper into some of these different trends, and just to help kind of offset, I guess, the costs that might be associated with collecting this data. Just wondering what sort of availability there is to these different data sources that you've presented.
So in terms of the NCDB data, there's the NCDB online that is available on the Transport Canada's website that provides some of the collision data that we collect and that we can share.
Okay, very good. And I do have another question that's come in. It is, does Transport Canada have data on vehicle movement causation of fatal collisions and serious injury collisions? And then in brackets, turn on red light, fail to stop.
I'm not aware that we have this type of data. So yeah, I would say no, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. And I do have another one that's come in. Let's see here. Does Transport Canada collect data related to in-depth collision investigations, especially data captured by event data recorders installed in involved vehicles, and data from staged crash tests for the purpose of compliance monitoring and safety research? Are these data available to Canadian safety researchers? That's a big question.
Can you repeat it?
Oh, sure. So whether does Transport Canada collect data related to in-depth collision investigations, especially that recorded by data recorders, and also with crash tests, staged crash tests in the data recorders, I guess, for the purpose of compliance monitoring and safety research. Again, it's a data availability question for Canadian safety researchers.
As far from what I know, I'm not aware of this data, but I could find out.
Brenda, it's Paul. Transport Canada does collect detailed collision investigations, but it's another group. It doesn't come through NCDB. So I would encourage people to reach out to Pascal Villeneuve from Transport Canada, and he'll be able to help them with respect to that.
Perfect. And I will provide his email in the chat in just a minute. But first, there is another question. Does Transport Canada have data on fatal collisions and serious injury collisions broken down by road segment makeup? And then in brackets, bend, rural straight, and intersection.
Yes, that's the kind of the data that we have available in the NCDB, and that's certainly things that could be identified from the NCDB data.
Okay, very good. And I'm just going to put Pascal's email in the Q&A for everyone. And once again, he is the person to do with collision investigation data. at Transport Canada. I hope he's okay with us doing that. Yeah, and before we finish off, I notice that we do still have another 5 minutes. We want to thank today's speakers, and we want to bring it back over to the beginning part of the hour, where we were reaching out and getting people's feedback in terms of how can we improve in CARSP. And but first of all, I just wanted to thank again Jean-Francois and Gail for an excellent overview. It's a very in-depth report, so I encourage you. I put the link to the report in the chat, so I encourage everybody to go and download that. So thank you again. Really appreciate it. And now, oh, you're very welcome.
Thanks.
And I'll turn it over to Raheem.
Thanks, Brenda, and thanks, Jean-Francois and Gail, for a wonderful presentation. It's always good to know the facts that we're dealing with. It helps inform our activity as an organization in Canada as well. So as Brenda said, we want to just give a last opportunity for any questions or comments about CARSP in general, because the purpose of an AGM is to really have the opportunity to hear from you. If you could even just take a minute, and the chat will remain open until, the chat will remain open until exactly 5 minutes, to maybe put a word or two indicating what you think should be a priority for CARSP over the next 1 or 2 years. So it could be anything from, research, information dissemination, webinars, more conferences, more information on our website, more engaging events, ability to network with each other. There's a lot of things that we could be putting our effort into, but we want to make sure that whatever we do is of the greatest value to you. So please take this opportunity now to have your voice heard and put in a word or two in the chat about what you have found most useful that we should continue doing, or anything that you think that we should be looking at doing that you need and maybe that we haven't been doing. So we'll just leave that open in the next few minutes for you to put your thoughts into the chat. Thank you. Other than that, I just wanted to also, while you're doing that, acknowledge that it is National Road Safety Week this week. So it's an opportunity to reflect on, the big picture of road safety here in Canada. We always need to be doing better. But this week, there's a lot of information that's been posted publicly. Some of it is on our website at carsp.ca. It's information, some of it comes from the Global Alliance of non-government organizations that's intended to help organizations from across Canada as well to pass resources on to your members. And hopefully it'll help, even just reduce your effort. You can just take some of the materials that have already been developed, spread the word further, and try to make a greater impact that way. So yeah, I encourage you to keep putting questions into the chat. And then the last invitation I wanted to make is to feel free to get in touch with, you've got Brenda's information. She's the one that emails you. So I know that's convenient, but if you feel free to reach out to any of the committee chairs as well. And I might have missed going over that in the organizational chart, which is strange because they put in such a huge effort and are very important parts of our organization. So just again, you did hear from some of them. The chair of the Structure and Governance Committee is Matthew Mulkern. The chair of the Membership and Marketing Committee is Brian Jonah. The chair of the Finance Committee is Paul Bose. And the chair of the Young Professionals Committee, who you heard from as well, is Robert Colonna. So feel free to reach out to them directly, or any members of the board if you happen to know them and you want to reach through us that way. Please do. Otherwise, I guess we'll just leave the chat open for a minute or two. And thank you, everyone, for your wonderful participation. And till next time.
Okay, thank you so much, Raheem. Well, I didn't receive a question, but I did receive a comment, which is very much appreciated. Carol Beringer said that CARSP does lots of value. I appreciate the vision and mission and all that's done by CARSP. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. It's great to receive that feedback. And I also just wanted to add to what Raheem said about UN Global Road Safety Week. There are some resources, as well as there's information about a Twitter storm that we're going to be participating in. If you go to our other events page and click on the UN Road Safety Week, it provides all that information there. So really encourage you to participate in that. And once again, just thank you everybody for participating today, and great to see you. And by all means, if you have any other feedback about CARSP, send it to me at info@carsp.ca. And otherwise, thank you and have a great rest of your day.